Stephen, welcome. Thank you so much for joining the Twitter space. I know you have a lot on your plate and a lot to do, so your time is greatly appreciated. And I'm happy to have met you in person at ETH Denver, which is where we kind of got on the same page and scheduled this. So, can you give us a little background, on yourself and what you were doing prior to Off-Chain Labs? How did you develop an interest in the crypto space? And kind of what led you to focus on layer two scaling solutions for Ethereum mainnet?
Hey, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for having me here. Off-Chain Labs, Arbitrum really grew out of Princeton University. So myself and my co-founders were all at Princeton in one capacity or another. I have my PhD from Princeton. My co-founder Ed was a longtime professor there, and my co-founder Harry was also a PhD student there at the same time as me. And I got into blockchain space personally around 2013, right when I started there. Back then, it was really all about Bitcoin. And together with Ed and my advisor and some others, we wrote a text Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. My early work in the space really focused a lot on securing digital assets and the cryptography of cryptocurrencies. And I did a lot of work on what's known as threshold cryptography is one thing I did. I did a bunch of work on, and technologies that I built out were later went on to form the basis of several companies, including Fireblocks, if you're familiar. So that was like my early work. Then I got involved in Arbitrum a little bit later, but the Arbitrum project itself has roots to at least 2013 or 2014. And in fact, if you look on YouTube, you'll find a 2014 video, the January 2015 video, the earliest mention of Arbitrum, and that's from a Princeton fall 2014 class project. And that project was led by my co-founder, Ed Felton. It was an undergraduate project at the time. And the reason why I love to say this, and I repeat it often, is because that actually predates Ethereum. Of course, we're at layer 2 for Ethereum. We've been thinking about scalability for a very, very long time, even before Ethereum was launched, because we always believed in the power of smart contracts. As Ethereum actualized and brought to people, we realized that there would be scaling issues. So we've been thinking about this very, very early on. And it was around 2018 that we moved from an academic project. We had a published paper in a top academic security conference, and we launched Arbitrum or as a commercial venture. We said, hey, this is really, really important, and we want to be the ones to build this out and continue developing it, because that's the way it goes. If you look back at our paper from 2018, it looks primitive today compared to everything we figured out since. And I'm pretty sure that if in 3 years from now we look back at what we have today, I'll probably say the same thing. So that was basically how I got into this. I've done a bunch of other work related to cryptocurrencies as well, but that's basically the path to Arbitrum, and as well as meeting my co-founders and founding the company.
Yeah, it's incredibly interesting that the idea for Arbitrum, or rather Off-Chain Labs, predated Ethereum, and I guess because block space is a kind of a common component of both systems, where block space is limited, so that the solution for making it more limitless, kind of you started brewing some ideas of how to do that. I didn't know that. That's very interesting. And you kind of touched on this before, but how did you meet your co-founders? I know you mentioned Harry, you met in Princeton. What about Ed?
Yeah, so Ed also, I met at Princeton. Ed was a professor at Princeton. He wasn't my advisor, but I worked closely with him throughout my time there. And so it actually was Ed who really began Arbitrum, as I mentioned, early on, and I only got involved. So the history of Ed is, one of the many, many interesting things that Ed's done is he, for the last, I think 2 years or so of the Obama administration, Ed went to the White House and was the deputy CTO of the White House, and also senior advisor to President Obama. And during those 2 years, Arbitrum basically, went on a back burner. The undergraduates have sort of finished their thing, and the project sort of lie fallow. It was like when Ed came back in 2017 that we really picked it up and said, hey, we need to build this out. At that time, Ethereum was thriving. We started seeing like early signs for the need of scale, like CryptoKitties, for example. We look back now, and we wish we could get back to the usage then, but we thought were the spikes then. But we continued to grow so much. But that was really when we picked it up again. But Ed's been involved from the very beginning, and I've worked with Ed at Princeton Ed spent, I think, 28 years at Princeton and was there, throughout my time there.
Right. And just for clarity for any listeners, Ed is the co-founder and chief scientist. Ed Felton. Harry Kaldner is the chief technology officer, and Stephen is the CEO and co-founder of Off-Chain Labs.
Yes.
I've been ruminating over this for some time, and this relates to kind of the proper nomenclature for layer one and layer two. And maybe you could give me some clarity on this, but the base layer would be synonymous with the settlement layer, and when it relates to Ethereum, it's synonymous with ETH mainnet. Would you kind of agree with that?
Yeah, there's a lot of different terms that people use. Commonly, people will say layer one to mean, the base layer, as you said, or Ethereum in our case. A layer two to mean just the platform you build on top of the layer one. And, these are also sometimes politicized terms because a lot of projects want to be considered layer two, and, and some have different security assumptions. I think the consensus at this point is if you derive your security from the layer one with none or minimal additional assumptions, then you're basically considered to be a layer two. And that means that you are not an independent blockchain, but you're built on top of the layer one. So Arbitrum is a layer two platform. And the layer one platform that it's built on is Ethereum, but also sometimes called the base layer, as you mentioned as well. So yeah, there's a lot of terminology. And the other terminology here is roll-up. There are different types of layer twos. Arbitrum is a roll-up. And then there are also different types of roll-ups. There's something called an optimistic roll-up, and that's what Arbitrum is. And I'm sure you'll get into that.
Yes.
I don't want to preempt you.
Great. So why are layer two solutions so important? Which applications or use cases are just not feasible on layer one?
So it's a combination of being able to do things that aren't possible in layer one, like you just mentioned, but it's also the fact of doing the same things for a lot cheaper. And that, it's all about unlocking new things. In the first case, it's unlocking new applications. And the second case is unlocking new opportunities for new classes of users, right? So you can take a DEX, for example. We can run a DEX on layer one, and there are some really, really excellent decentralized exchanges on layer one, but the transactions cost 10 or tens of dollars, depending on the congestion, or even hundreds of dollars sometimes, depending on the complexity of what you're doing. Many users will be priced out. You might have seen in the past people say, hey, Ethereum is a whale's game, right? Because the idea is that it's so expensive to transact that you have to have a really high value transaction in order to make it worth it, right? If you're a retail trader and you want to do a $10 trade or a $100 trade even, and the fee itself is $10, you're going to think twice about doing that. It's going to cut, very deeply into your margins. You do a few of these trades and you really don't have any principal left because the fees are so high. So that's an example of something which you can do it on Ethereum. We're not unlocking anything, any new capability for that example, but by lowering the fees, we're making things just a whole lot better for a lot of users. And a lot of users that were previously priced out can now participate and enjoy the same benefits. So that's one class of things that we do. So you can do a lot of the same things for lower fees. And again, I like to focus on lower fees is good for everyone. Even if you can afford higher fees, you're probably happy to have lower fees. But the more important thing to me is the inclusivity, that there are people that just can't participate and applications that just don't make sense at that level that become feasible with lower fees. And that's really a good segue to the second type, which is, in addition to just taking all the same and doing it cheaper, there are things that are just simply too expensive to do on Ethereum today that we can do on Arbitrum. And I think if you're looking for a class of product or an industry or a vertical that's really taken off on Arbitrum that you don't really see on Ethereum, that's, these futures or derivative exchanges that exist. And for various technical reasons, they do complex transactions, and their transactions are often very, very expensive. Sometimes these transactions are so expensive that they take more gas than is available on an Ethereum block or close to it. And the ability to do these transactions, you just can't do them on Ethereum because, the $10 transaction might seem, for a trade might seem high, but here we're talking about a lot more than that. So unlocking that potential is really, really nice. And that's, again, all about inclusivity. Now we're not talking only about new people, new sort of classes of investors, but also just new applications, things that you simply couldn't do. You were priced out on Ethereum that are possible on Arbitrum. And then there's, other applications that are made possible because of the faster speed that we do for transactions. So, there are certain projects that are using this. I had a call last week with a project called Hashflow, and they're giving OTC trades, direct quotes from market makers on the blockchain, and they need a very, very tight time margin. So the fact that Arbitrum gives faster confirmations also enables new possibilities, and you can do things more efficiently that you couldn't do previously. Another place where that's important is there's a really, really exciting gaming ecosystem that's beginning to form in Arbitrum. We're seeing some really cool things, for example, in the Treasure Down Bridge world. And for gaming in general, speed, I think, is very, very, very important, particularly as the games become more complex and games that currently exist and have big user bases move to the blockchain. Having transactions that are fast is very, very important. If you're playing a game, the last thing you want is to do something and then the spinner shows up on the screen for 15 seconds or 10 seconds or 30 seconds, right? That's not a very good user experience. So having a better user experience for the fees as well as the speed really, really enables lots of different applications where the blockchain is almost in the background, right? Number one, you have a great game. Number two, you have a blockchain application. And in order to do that, you have to make sure that you can stay in the background. And if your
Right.
fees are really high or it's really, really slow, it's very, very hard to stay in the background because users notice that, and it leads to a very negative user experience. So, we're improving the user experience on all those ways. And I think we're bringing in both new users, new classes of users, and also new classes of applications.
Yeah, I think you guys are doing a terrific job at that because, we'll get into this a little bit later, which is, the different types of approaches to layer two solutions, whether it's optimistic rollups or ZK rollups. But really, there's also kind of like an ecosystem and technology combination that allows a layer two to thrive, right? The reality is that a project's decision that's ready to build on layer two is not solely based on the technological implementation of the layer two or the rollup, but really it's kind of like the network effect of all the projects and users that are already on the layer two solution, which in your case, in Arbitrum, holds a dominant market share measured by like total value locked at 2.9 billion or over 50%. And that's incredibly important because even coming from a project myself, DFrag, which is a lending protocol for NFTs, as we make these design decisions, we consider many important factors, one of which is where are the users? Because without the users, you can't get the appropriate feedback that every new project desperately needs to build forward. And I think that Arbitrum has become a great place for that. As you mentioned, Treasure DAO, along with many other projects, are building atop your layer two solution. So you kind of want to go where the users are going, not necessarily just make a decision where to build solely on the technological kind of implementation of how the rollups are done.
Absolutely. The most important part of our ecosystem are the users. And, we're very fortunate to have a really, really strong base of users and also a strong base of developers, right? And these feed into each other, right? The developers, bring the great experiences that users can come and use. And probably the most important thing in the blockchain space and smart contract, or the most interesting thing to me, I should say, is the composability. So it's also just the fact that you want, if, for example, take DFrag, a lending platform for NFTs, it's also important to have a good NFT scene on the platform that you launch on, right? And that's
Exactly.
a small aspect of composability, and also you're providing liquidity. So having lots of liquidity on the chain is important, and interacting. And I'm sure there are many much more complex interactions that you can have with potentially other lending markets or dexes, etc. And this is like the coolest thing about DeFi is that you can take these different applications and stack them together like Lego and build higher level. We're seeing this today where derivative platforms are tapping into the liquidity, for example, on dexes. And it's a simple example, but time and time again, there's this deep dependency graph. So it's really, really important to have the whole ecosystem. And once upon a time, I think, I used to hear one of the biggest fears that people had about L2 adoption was the coordination problem, which is like, you can't just have one app go over and now that's on L2. It doesn't work. You sort of need people to move en masse, right? You can't have just the DEX. It just doesn't work. You can't have just the, right? You need all the different pieces. And part of it's because you need the different building blocks. Technically, part of it's because you need an ecosystem that will attract users. And I think one thing that was very, very important to us in the way we launched with a fair launch strategy, which said, we don't care who you are welcome to launch on Arbitrum. We'd love to support you. You might be the biggest project on layer one. You might be just a few people working in a garage. But we want to have you. We're going to roll out the carpet for you and do whatever we can to support you, and do that in a way that's fair. And when we launched late August, everyone went live at the same time. There was a 3-month period where developers could build, and everyone went live at the same time. And the idea was just fairness and having the ability to bootstrap the ecosystem in a way that everyone can go live at the same time, which is just so important for composability. So, there's a lot of coordination and questions here, and the importance of having users and liquidity, and trying to really make the most welcoming environment. Yeah,
and that's a great segue for how Arbitrum attracts, supports, and grows alongside projects like this. How important is the development of these projects that potentially can bring along with them hundreds of thousands of new users to L2s and Arbitrum specifically, and to any project that's currently deciding which layer 2 solution is right for them. What are the main points that you would convey to them?
Great question. Yeah, firstly, the developers and the users are, like I said, the most important thing in our ecosystem, and everything we do is really just to set the stage for that innovation, right? We don't do anything really on the application layer. We just try to set the stage where developers and applications can thrive and users can thrive and come and have a great experience with these. And if I were talking to a project that's considering launching Arbitrum, and I do this all the time, I would focus on the low fees that we have and the fast user experience. And that's really, really important almost across the board. But the other thing that I would focus on is, like you said, the ecosystem that we have. But there are other solutions that have low fees and a nice ecosystem. I think the most important thing that I would try to hone in on is the security aspect, and that's where we're big believers in Ethereum security. There's a reason why we're building a layer 2. We think it's critically important to scale without sacrificing the security of Ethereum, and we think we do a very, very good job. And that's our most important thing, is providing the security to users. And it's a hard thing to sell, to be honest, because you say to someone like, "Oh, we're secure," but then they say, "Well, until it breaks, it's hard to argue that it's broken."
Of course.
And we hope that these projects. Well, the last thing we're not hoping for that any of these things ever break. We're not hoping that any of our competitors are hacked or anything like that, right? We would never want that. But we do believe that there's value in having the decentralization and security of Ethereum, and it works until it doesn't work. It's a hard thing to sell, but I think it's hard to understate the importance of security, particularly as we pour more and more value into this ecosystem. And I don't think that's going down anytime soon. I think more and more and more traditional industries are coming to the blockchain space. There'll be more and more value that's dependent on this infrastructure. So coordinating around a high security solution and not compromising on the values of Ethereum and the security of Ethereum, I think, is important. And the last thing I would highlight to a project, and this applies to really anyone listening today that might be in this category of sort of trying to figure out where you want to launch, is we're there to support you all along. Like I said, we had a fair launch strategy from the very, very beginning. We do what we can, be it co-marketing, be it getting on a Twitter space, really trying to push you out and help spread the word and help connect you in our ecosystem to other projects. We don't play favorites, or if we do this for everyone, but we really try to create the most welcoming ecosystem for everyone. And potentially, I guess, just one more point that I would stress. I think I said the last one was the last one, so I lied there. One more point is the importance of onboarding is also a big part of user experience. How do you get funds onto Arbitrum or onto another layer 2? And of course, there's the Arbitrum bridge, and there's the analog layer 2 bridge, and there's some great third-party bridges as well that really do an excellent job in doing this with a great user experience. Arbitrum is also, I believe, the only layer 2 with centralized exchange integrations, and we have many of these. Notably, we have Binance, FTX. What that means is if you're an FTX or a Binance user, or Huobi, OKX, Crypto.com, etc., a Bybit, you can go directly and say, "Hey, I want my ETH on Arbitrum," and they'll just send it to you on Arbitrum directly. And if you're a developer thinking about making the best experience for your users, these centralized exchange integrations are very, very, very important, because there are a lot of different types of users out there. Some of them prefer to keep their money on Ethereum and use the decentralized exchanges and the decentralized bridges, and there are great solutions there. But there's also, you want to include those who are more comfortable in centralized exchanges, and we think that's also a very important aspect of our ecosystem.
That's a very important point. And for those users that might not be as savvy, seeing the message not on the way into Arbitrum, but on the way out, where it takes a week or more to get the funds back, that could be a terrifying message. And having them integrate into centralized exchanges, makes that message less pronounced and encourages new users who are not as savvy to onboard to Arbitrum and use all the tools and projects that are available.
Absolutely. And if you're, these bridges that I alluded to, like Connects, like Hop, like Seller, there are lots of them, and you can look at our portal for a full list. And these exchanges basically, they bypass this for you. You can withdraw. If you have an ETH on Arbitrum, you can withdraw to FTX immediately, deposit in FTX immediately, then immediately withdraw back to ETH Layer 1. Similarly with Hop or Connects or Seller, etc. And these are really, really important usability things because the average user cannot be waiting a week. There are many, many bridges and exchanges that just do that for you and say you want your money immediately, be it on the exchange, be it on Ethereum, you can get it immediately. And actually, here's some alpha. I just tweeted a few minutes ago promising some alpha. So here you go. We have a brand new bridge coming quite soon, which is going to make this a lot easier. Part of the problem is, the way I see it, the reason why some users are still experiencing this 1 week delay is because they're coming to our native bridge. And they're doing that for a reason in which they trust us and they know this is the Arbitrum bridge. It's a great reason, right? They're like, well, I don't know about this third party, but I can trust the Arbitrum team.
Right.
This is their official bridge. And the native bridge today exposes you to that 1 week delay. We have a really nice, clean update coming along, which will enable users to use fast bridges. But the reason why it took us so long to get there is really the principles we had all along. I mentioned the fair launch. And we said, well, how do we do this? We can just pick a certain bridge and integrate them and say, here's a fast experience. But then we're sort of taking sides in this industry and we're sort of putting one competitor among another. And that was basically against everything that we believe in and want to do. So then we said, hey, how do we do this in a way that's fair, that really exposes users to the variety of options in a way that's usable so they can get their fast experience, but we're not sort of playing favorites. And, we have a really, really great team that thought hard about this question. It might seem like a simple question, but it's actually really, really hard to get right. And, these are the things that we spend a lot of time thinking about. So you'll see a really, really cool new bridging experience in Arbitrum where we're able to push users to fast exchange options, but also make sure that, we're giving all the different various bridges and exchanges, et cetera, fair treatment.
That's awesome. I love it. Looking forward to it. So this leads to an important topic, which I wanted to personally get some clarity on as well. Kind of the more you read about various different options for layer twos, the more you discover that you don't know all the intricacies. So I'd love to use this opportunity to discuss two main layer two approaches, which one is the optimistic rollup and the other is the ZK rollup, the zero knowledge proof. Can you please summarize both and talk about the differences as they relate to transaction costs, security, developer adoption, and interoperability?
Absolutely. The first thing I'll say is there's a lot of people and a lot of really smart people and really great teams in the space building things. And, in a very real way, there's a trade-off space. And, we believe that we're doing the right side of the trade-off and we're exposing the best technology to users. But, definitely nothing negative to say about any other teams that are really doing very important work as well. But let me sort of get into the different options that there are and sort of try to explain what Arbitrum does compared to other solutions, etc. So you mentioned ZK rollups and optimistic rollup. So before we go into the ZK versus optimistic, let's just say, what is a rollup? What are the features that all rollups share? And I think for that is basically Ethereum has a limited capacity. And we can't get past that limited capacity. But what we can do is we can say, how do I use that capacity more efficiently? How do I get more mileage out of the fixed capacity of Ethereum? And the way we do that, and by we I mean all rollups, is we say, well, let's only put the most minimal amount of data you need on Ethereum and take all the execution, actually executing and doing transactions, take all the computation and storage off chain. So what you do is you put compressed data on Ethereum that allows you to know the inputs, know exactly what you're supposed to compute, know exactly what you're supposed to store. So from the data you put in Ethereum, you can reconstruct everything on Arbitrum. But the actual computation, the actual execution happens off-chain. And now the big question is, and I'm saying Arbitrum here, but again, this is all rollups. They take Ethereum and they put a very, very condensed representation of the data there, and then they do the execution and do the expensive stuff off chain. But the thing is, we're not done here, because what happens off chain, remember, we want the security of Ethereum. So we want Ethereum to vouch for the correctness of what happened off chain. We want Ethereum to say, hey, you didn't do that computation in Arbitrum, but I, Ethereum, am saying that I'm confident that's correct. And that's how you get the security of Ethereum. And the easiest way to have Ethereum do this is just say, hey, Ethereum, do you want to just run everything on Ethereum? That defeats the purpose. That's exactly what we're trying not to do. We're trying to scale by taking the execution off Ethereum. So the unifying factor that really unites all rollups is proofs. We are proving to Ethereum the correctness. We're saying, hey, Ethereum, all this computation happened off chain. You didn't do it directly, but here is a succinct proof that what happened off chain is correct. And that's really rollups in general, proving to Ethereum the correctness. Here's where we can sort of differentiate between the different types of rollups. They differ in how they prove to Ethereum that things are correct. In Arbitrum, we use something called fraud proofs, where we basically say, hey, Ethereum, I'm not actually giving you a proof right now that is correct. Here's what we did, and just trust me. But if anyone wants to challenge, there's a really efficient mechanism where they can prove that I lied. And that's why it's called an optimistic rollup. Optimistically, we don't actually include any proof at all. We just say, hey, Ethereum, this is what happened. And then we open up a period of time. And that's where, by the way, the 1 week delay comes from, to withdraw from this 1 week period of time that 1 week is an arbitrary value, but one that the community has come to consensus on as the right amount of time. And so that's what we implement. So there's 1 week where anyone can say, hey, that's wrong. So the property here is, right now, there's a whitelist, but in theory, as long as anyone in the world can come ahead and say, hey, Ethereum, this claim is wrong, then Ethereum can very, very efficiently mediate the dispute and determine who's right. So the way we prove to Ethereum is using these fraud proof mechanisms. So to recap, optimistic rollups prove to Ethereum what happened off-chain via the fraud proof mechanism. ZK rollups do something called validity proofs. ZK is actually a misnomer because there's a type of validity proof called zero knowledge proofs, in which they prove these things in a way that hides the data and gives you zero knowledge about what happens. In practice, though, no ZK rollup, actually maybe Aztec, but with the exception of Aztec, all of their ZK rollups, to my knowledge, don't actually use this feature, and they're really just validity proof rollups. And what they do is basically the opposite. Rather than saying, hey, Ethereum, this is correct, if you think I'm wrong, anyone, go ahead and challenge me, they give you a validity proof and say, hey, Ethereum, this is correct, and we are giving you a proof that it's correct right now. And so as soon as the proof is computed, it settles. So what are I guess you asked about the advantages and disadvantages of these various the trade-offs here.
Yeah, specifically as it relates to transaction costs, security, developer adoption. How easy is it to utilize and build applications and projects, and of course interoperability. The communication between these rollups and mainnet, and potentially other new rollups that come about in the future.
I'll start with interoperability. That's where Arbitrum really, really shines, that we have full EVM compatibility. That means that you take the same bytecode you use on Ethereum, the same precompiles work, everything basically that's on Ethereum works on Arbitrum. You don't have to change anything. And that's a large reason why I think we were really the first ones in the rollup space to go after full EVM compatibility. Today, a lot of people are trying for this, but I'm pretty sure that we were working on this well before anyone else was. And I think that's very, very important for building the ecosystem. Just saying to developers, you don't have to rewrite your code. You don't have to redo security audits. You don't have to learn a new language or a new paradigm. You just take your code and it's going to work. You just layer to your code in one click. And that's something which is very, very important. Yeah, and
reducing the friction to start a project.
Exactly, and people get confused there. We can have merits. Like some people say, well, my language, or our paradigm is actually better, and it's we can argue that point if we want. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. It doesn't matter. It matters what developers know, what developers are used to. Also, the code that's written, right? So much code exists in Solidity and EVM languages that just doesn't exist. If you're trying to bootstrap a new language, or even trying to bootstrap a slightly new syntax using familiar languages. And so that's a place where I think we really, really shine. When it comes to transaction costs, the information out there today, might be a little hard to digest. if you go to a site like L2 Fees, for example, you'll see that generally the ZK rollups look cheaper than the optimistic rollups. And the reason why it's an unfair comparison is because all the ZK rollups that exist today in any production sense are application-specific rollups. They aren't generalized platforms. They're rollups that are optimized for payments or optimized for NFT minting and transfers or something like that. And the reason why that's important to note is because these are sort of an apple and an orange. You can build an optimistic rollup that's application specific. You can build a ZK rollup that's application specific. And application specific rollups are always going to be cheaper. But when you think about the goal that everyone's working towards is general platform. Today, the only ZK rollups that exist in production, to my knowledge, are application specific. And when you optimize something to be application specific, it's always going to be cheaper than going through a general platform. So the fair comparison is, what does a general platform optimistic rollup cost compared to a general platform ZK rollup? And there are no general platform ZK rollups today that show their costs, to my knowledge. So this is a theoretical comparison based on what we understand. And our belief firmly is that ZK rollups will be much, much more expensive long-term than optimistic rollups. And here's two reasons for that. Number one, we all have to put data on Ethereum. ZK rollups, some of them compress it differently. It's not necessarily a win at all, but I'll leave that. So we all have to put data on Ethereum. But then the question is these proofs. Remember, we optimistically don't do any proofs at all. And what that means is we can basically run our code very, very fast, run our contracts almost on the native machine, right? So we have very, very low cost of operating a node. For ZK rollups, the hidden variable, the thing that doesn't show up on chain, that's quite expensive, is the cost of proving, the cost of actually creating this proof. And in order to do that, the technology that we have today doesn't allow you to go and prove something over the EVM or prove something over a regular virtual machine or regular instruction set. It requires you to compile down into what's known as circuits or constraint systems and then prove over these. And there's generally, quite a high overhead to both compile your high-level code into these constructs, as well as a high-level overhead for proving. And without specific benchmarks, suffice it to say that there are several order of magnitudes. And you remember, the difference is in the happy case in Arbitrum and optimistic rollups, we don't have to create these proofs at all, and we can run basically natively, whereas you have to go through these much more expensive constructs. So, the fact that it doesn't have the sort of compatibility of Ethereum, there are many teams that are working towards a ZK EVM-like construct, but generally there's a long list of asterisks of the things that it doesn't support because they're not really going through the EVM directly. They have to go through the circuitry, and there are things that are just very, very inefficient in that computing model. That's number one, but also the cost, the fact that we don't have to do proofs in the happy case, whereas they have to do proofs, and their proofs are so expensive compared to ours. And again, just to reiterate my first point, we have a lot of respect for these teams. There are some really, really great teams out there working on ZK proofs. I'm personally excited to see the progress that they'll make, but the state that it is today is optimistic rollups are much more compatible and fully existent today. We don't have a general purpose ZK rollup, certainly not one that supports the EVM. And our belief firmly is that if and when this does exist, it's going to be for the long term a lot more expensive. But that's not to say that the teams here aren't doing very, very important work in looking into these problems and looking how to optimize them. And then just for fairness, the one place where ZK rollups have a benefit over optimistic rollups is when it comes to this 1 week bridging delay, right? So in the native bridge in our protocol, there's a 1 week delay. That's a delay that allows anyone to submit a fraud proof. ZK rollups, the delay is much shorter, generally on the order of several hours up to a day. It's the amount of time that it takes you to compute one of these proofs. So you get your funds generally in a few hours or a day, as opposed to the 7-day period in optimistic rollups. However, as I alluded to before, with the introduction of exchanges on Arbitrum, direct centralized exchanges, and with these fast bridges like Hop, like Seller, like Connext, it becomes much, much, much easier for users to get their funds off immediately. And for basically ERC20s and ETH, and it's really, really a problem that your average user should not be dealing with. Your average user should not, in practice, have to wait a week. But I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that advantage.
Yeah, no, it's one important point is just for any new project, the bandwidth to learn all these new components as opposed to having something that's more interoperable with Solidity as language. It cannot be understated. One of the last points is the security. Can you summarize and underline the differences in security of an optimistic versus a ZK proof?
Absolutely. There's always implementation details and, are there implementation bugs? That's a point which, we have to, when I analyze the security, I'll assume that both of these are perfectly implemented according to their spec. Although before going there, I will note that I do think that what we do on a protocol level is a lot easier for many developers to read our code and understand. When it comes to these complex zero knowledge proofs, I think there's a smaller population in the world can actually make sense and understand these. That being said, that's not to say what we're doing is simple. So there's a lot of complexity in both cases. But when it comes to security, they really both derive their security from Ethereum. In the case of a ZK rollup, they prove to Ethereum, and Ethereum directly verifies the proof. So again, unless the math is broken behind the ZK proof or the implementation is broken, Ethereum verifies it, then it gets the security of Ethereum. In Arbitrum's case, similarly, we post these claims to Ethereum, and Ethereum has to verify the fraud proof if someone claims it, and then it mediates the back and forth between the prover and the challenger to find out who the winner is. So there's one additional assumption, which is that you can get transaction on Ethereum, right? So if I see, hey, there's fraud in Arbitrum, someone posted the wrong thing, I have to go ahead and say, I need to now tell this to Ethereum. And that's where the week comes along. You have a week to do this. So in practice, while it is an additional assumption, it's a very minimal assumption. I'll put it to you this way. If Ethereum was a system in which you could be censored for a week, that I can't get a simple small transaction on Ethereum in 1 week. Ethereum is broken in many, many, many other ways than just rollups, right? The entire DeFi is broken if we can, add liquidity or liquidate, etc., in 1 week, or even get Oracle updates, right? So Ethereum, the entire ecosystem basically assumes that you can get transactions in relatively quickly, and that's why the weak assumption is like it's so long that it's extraordinarily clear that you can. So in practice, they both derive their security from Ethereum, but those are sort of the technical nuances of the different approaches and the security models.
Yeah. So thank you for that, and I'd be remiss if I didn't cover the upcoming Ethereum merge. And just to set the context for our listeners, Ethereum is moving to a consensus mechanism called proof of stake from proof of work. And proof of stake is a consensus mechanism used by blockchain networks for distributed consensus. It requires users to stake their ETH to become validators in the network, and these validators are responsible for the state of the network. The merge refers to the beacon chain and mainnet coming together. The beacon chain introduced proof of stake, which serves as the consensus layer and was shipped on December 1st of 2020. And it runs parallel to the Ethereum mainnet, which is still in proof of work. And currently, and these numbers are staggering and impressive, there are over 300,000 active validators on the beacon chain with close to 10 million ETH. My question to you is, with the merge coming soon, roughly, I think it's around June, and we know this because there's something called the kind of like a self-imposed deadline called the difficulty bomb, which is a mechanism basically that increases the difficulty level of proof of work exponentially. And over time, this leads to the chain becoming so difficult to mine that it grinds to a complete halt and stops producing blocks, and people are forced to move over to another. So what impact does this merge have on layer twos, such as Arbitrum? Does it pose any risk to any existing projects building on Arbitrum?
Yeah, great question. So I don't think there are really risks that are imposed by it, but I think there's a lot of benefits. Right. And obviously, we there will be test nets and like other protocols, of course, you make sure Arbitrum works and nothing breaks as always possible. But to my knowledge, there shouldn't be any sort of breaking changes for us, but there should be a lot of benefits. Number one is the vast majority of our costs are putting data on chain. Remember, I said we sort of compress what we do when we use Ethereum very efficiently, but we're still putting a lot of data on chain. And that is the vast majority of the cost that we have in operating Arbitrum, and that means that's the vast majority of the fees that users pay. And so what happens then? It's not the entirety of the fees, because there's also layer two costs, but it's a lot of it. So one thing that will happen post merge is we'll have sort of data sharding, and there are various proposals of how storage cost will come down, potentially up to 100x even. So that's going to be phenomenally important for us, right? Critically, we look forward to this because if the costs of storage come down, cost of call data, that's the type of Ethereum storage that we use, that comes down, then we are in a very, very good position. And it's really a lot better for our users. Our costs will come down pretty significantly with that. In terms of the merge itself, sort of moving to a proof of stake system, environmental benefits, etc. So we're not special there, but of course, those are important to us. Two things I'll call out that are sort of helpful in a roll-up sense for moving to proof of stake. One is you get faster finality. So you don't have to worry as much about layer one reorgs. And now you wait, say, some number of blocks, maybe 12 blocks or so on Ethereum after you consider a message to be final. And what this means is in Arbitrum, there are multiple ways to post transactions. One of those ways is to post directly on chain. It means that our sequencer can pick those transactions up much more quickly because it has confidence that they'll be included quickly. So it's a technical point, but it's one thing that is definitely going to make the distributed aspect of Arbitrum better and the user experience there better. And the other thing is, to the extent that the post-merge chain is less prone to sort of denial of service attacks or censorship attacks, then potentially we, and I don't mean we as Arbitrum, but really we as a community, can re-examine the question of how long should the challenge period be. The 7-day challenge period, again, it's all about, can I get a transaction onto Ethereum in 1 week? And that's clear that today, potentially in a post-merge world, we'd be comfortable lowering that and say, hey, the surface is a little bit different. The delay or denial of surface is a little bit different, and maybe we can shorten that period. Again, that's not a decision we would make ourselves. It's a conversation that we would definitely participate in. But ultimately, I think it's a point where the community may re-examine, may not, but that's something which I definitely want to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and it seems that the layer two solutions on a post-merge world, can you see layer twos becoming kind of a de facto transaction layer as opposed to the settlement layer? From a technological standpoint and from a settlement standpoint, things become secure and fast enough where a design decision to go anywhere but the layer two becomes kind of silly for a project.
I think so. I mean, obviously I'm biased and I want to think so. So take everything I say with a grain of salt, but I'll give you my reasoning for it. I believe the security and decentralization of Ethereum is critical. And if we give up on that, you can actually, what are we even doing here, right? If we go back to systems that are de facto centralized, that the only way to participate is to run a data center, then we haven't really decentralized at all. Maybe we've made ourselves happy. Maybe we've sort of shifted the power, brokers and taken power from certain institutions and given them to others. But we haven't really accomplished anything, for the vision. And that's sort of, what excites me most about this space. So I think, keeping to Ethereum's values of decentralization, of high security are critically important. But there are practical issues. It's nice for me to sit here and say that, but if you're a user or even a developer that's developing your app and say, hey, I can launch on this platform and it's going to cost me, my users, $10 per transaction or $100 per transaction. I can launch on this platform and it'll be a few cents. It's very hard to really say, follow the values there and say, well, I believe in decentralization, because it's also there are competitive factors. So really having the low fees is really, really, really important for users and developers to continue to thrive and continue to make sure that the decentralized message doesn't get sort of forgotten and move to other chains, because you can't blame users for wanting lower transactions. And that's why I think I like to say rollups are basically the common denominator. There are those that care about security, and there are those that care about decentralization. And the nice thing is in Arbitrum, both of those people, both of those types of people, both of those applications types and developer types can meet. If you care a lot about security, we have you covered. If you care a lot about speed of transactions, we have you covered. If you care a lot about the cost of transactions, we have you covered. And as our transactions get lower, that becomes more and more and more compelling. So yeah, definitely, even today, Arbitrum today, our fees are definitely more than some more centralized solutions. We're at a very good point, and the common denominator holds. But as they get slower, it just becomes more and more and more and more simple. Like I don't usually, at least in the conversations that I have, people don't come to me and say, hey, I don't want to launch on Ethereum. It's usually, I want to launch on Ethereum, but. And so when you take away the appeal of the other by lowering our transaction fees and giving people the security of Ethereum, but also the low fees that might entice them to leave Ethereum, then they're really back at Ethereum. Because there's no one that's saying, at least in my conversations, hey, I really don't like Ethereum. I love Ethereum, but this is a problem, and we're solving those bugs.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that, and I'm glad that your values of decentralization are at the heart of what you're doing. And lastly, Vitalik Buterin praised Arbitrum and in the Discord channel by saying you guys are a central part of the solution, and it's great to see all the progress that you've done. First of all, how did that feel? Was it like a sign that you were on the right path and that your team was on the right path? And secondly, what's your relationship like with Vitalik now and the Ethereum contributors between the Arbitrum team and the Ethereum team? What's the communication like?
Yeah, excellent question. Thanks. Yeah, it was definitely a very important moment for our team. Hearing that from Vitalik, and so the context there, which may be unknown or forgotten to users, it was at a time where there was a public conversation that was very negative on some of the Ethereum scaling. So to sort of ground us and remind us that there's people care about what we're doing, particularly people like Vitalik. I think it was very motivating for us to continue to fight the fight that we're fighting,
Mm-hmm.
and fight for bringing Ethereum security and decentralizations to users at lower cost.
Absolutely.
The thing that Vitalik is obviously a very, very impressive individual, but one of the things that's very impressive about him is he sort of doesn't like to get political in terms of the cross Ethereum politics, and he's supportive to everyone. So we have a great relationship with the Ethereum Foundation, a great relationship with Vitalik, as do our competitors, and that's really, I think, the most important thing, and we're happy about that. Part of the beauty of the decentralization of the community aspect of Ethereum is that it's open to everyone. And the same way we're open up to every bridge that wants to launch an Arbitrum, where the Ethereum Foundation and Vitalik are supportive to us and our competitors in a very friendly and we believe to be a very fair way. Now, that doesn't mean that we're all created equally. We believe that we're doing something which is at a very good point, a trade-off point for users. We're the only roll-up today that offers a general purpose platform with fraud proofs built out. And that's, very, very important, and we'll continue to hammer home why we think we shine. But from the Ethereum Foundation's perspective and Vitalik's perspective, I think, their support is very, very important to us. And, it's inclusive support that, sort of tries to bridge the gap between us and our competitors and say, hey, how can we work on joint efforts? How can we, work to move on things that will help all of you? For example, the recent proposals to lower call data cost. So really having them as sort of the anchor of the ecosystem and really supportive is really a very, very important to us. And we'll keep delivering and building and delivering on the dream of Ethereum. But we can't do this alone. And the support of Vitalik, the support of the Ethereum Foundation, the support of the developers that are building on us, right? That's it's critical, and the support of all the users that have used Arbitrum. And again, to any developer out there, just to recall, we are there to support you, and we want we're fair and open to everyone. So reach out. You can DM me directly. You can DM our Twitter account. We're always happy to help, and really want to create the most inclusive L2 that.
And just to underline before you go, Stephen, in Denver, when I met Stephen face to face, he was standing at the Arbitrum booth as any other regular team member of Arbitrum. And actually, at the time, I didn't put the two together. So kudos to everything that you've done and how inviting you are to the community and the builders that are attempting to build great projects on Arbitrum. And thank you for taking the time for this Twitter space. Definitely looking forward to everything that you'll accomplish in the future.
Likewise, thank you so much for having me. It was great to meet you in person, and thanks for inviting me to be here. It was a ton of fun, and I'm really looking forward to D-Frag launching an Arbitrum, and can't wait to see that go.
Awesome. Take care, Stephen, and thank you everyone for listening. Once again, this is going to be available on the Web3Frontier podcast series, where you could listen to it at any time. Thanks, everyone, and have a great rest of your day or night, wherever you are.